Putting the priority lit round targets on your roster to add to a supercharged start. That is what we're doing today on RotoViz Overtime. We are going to talk through the kind of back to front approach here, what players are left, what are available, and how you can really add those finishing touches to your roster. We are drafting in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, the $125 entry fee, $300,000 to first place. Shawn, we have started off a team here where we have 5 wide receivers, 2 running backs, 1 QB, 1 tight end, quarterback Kyler Murray, the tight end Tyler Warren, and then we have Cam Scalaboo, Chase Brown at running back, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Ted McMillan, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver. Lots of ways we can play out the remainder of this draft, but I have to say, through 9 rounds, it's looking like it's going to be a pretty fun team with a large amount of upside. And we're just going to make sure we nail these final kind of 11 picks or so to take home that $300,000 from the 101 here. Is that what we're planning to do?
Yeah, I mean, you've got Chase Brown. You've got Jamar Chase at the very top, the 2 chases there out of Cincinnati. And you have Tyreek Hill. So you basically have the best player from 2024 and the best player from 2022 and 2023. They're together on that roster. And then you have that breakout play in Ted McMillan, plus Jerry Jeudy, the guy you should have on every team. Colm, we've been able to add Tyler Warren to this mix to give us even more upside. And then we have Kyler Murray playing off of the Bengals in week 17. So many different ways that we can go. And we certainly have it set up in terms of the theme that you developed for this draft of what do the picks that we know we're going to make in rounds 20 through 15, what do they tell us about decisions we can make in this crucial area right here? Do you have some names that you want to float that sort of help us understand what this 10-11 should be?
Yeah, so we are kind of set up in the kind of direction that I had hoped to go. Now I have Sam Laporta, George Kittle in mind as potential tight ends, but we don't get those. We do get Tyler Warren, somebody with a lot of upside. So we kind of are in the bracket of where I was hoping to be 1-2 running backs at this point, get your wide receivers, have a tight end, and then hopefully have a QB entering that kind of QB window where we now have Kyler Murray. So if we look through the entire board, it is interesting. Like, the 20th round, there's some interesting options, and that becomes kind of like, what do we need to seal the end of this roster? I am interested. Trevor Etienne, Shawn, continues to go undrafted in this particular format. I'll be interested to see, maybe he is Mr. Irrelevant at the 20.12 selection. Some interesting running backs lit in that draft. Taj Brooks is in there. Maybe doesn't fit as much on this draft because we have a Chase Brown. So, Woody Marks come in, JCM down with the Washington Commanders maybe, but Rashard Smith, 17th round, we want to be looking at like that 16th, 17th round, where you have, Jarquez Hunter, DJ Giddens, Will Shipley, Rashad Smith, Marshawn Lloyd. I would be very open to. There's a range there. There's a lot of running backs that I'm going to be kind of pitching to you, Shawn, as we go through these particular rounds. Wide receivers, we're looking out for. Amika Ibuka did go already, but maybe a fall in Jaden Higgins. I don't expect that to happen, but Luther Burden, Trey Harris, if we move down the rounds, Marvin Mims, Jalen McMillan. I do notice, Shawn, on this document, somehow I have Darius Slayton marked on it. That is not by intention. I don't know how I managed to do that, but maybe we'll have a conversation when we get to Darius Slayton. Don't know why I have circled him there, but I do think that the area that we will have those conversations on as well is the tight ends later on. Harold Fanning, Javonte Sanders, Terrence Ferguson, maybe even a Ben Sinnott. But then we look at the QBs as well. So we are on the clock. I've talked long enough. Shawn, who do we want to get here? Because we have the flexibility, and spoiler alert, we've added a running back.
Well, we went off the board a little bit here. One of the toughest names for me in putting together that 0 RB countdown was Zach Charbonnet, in part because we think that Kenneth Walker is such a superstar. But I mentioned wanting to get a Seattle player on this roster.
Yep.
We go ahead and do that and give us a little bit of flexibility to get more Kenneth Walker, because now we have him balanced with the guy who will be the league winner if he gets hurt. Colm, my question here, do we want to go with Colston Loveland and lean into these rookie tight ends and get the upside from one of them, or do we want to come back with a running back on a team we already have a buy from in either Tootin or Spears? 8 and 10 we already have covered.
Yeah, I'm good with Spears here if you want to go in that direction. I would have been good with Loveland as well, but I do really like some of these running backs, and it starts to backfill pretty quick here as we get those three in a row with Scadaboo, Charbonnet, and Spears. So you mentioned the bye weeks, and it's not something that I look at it, and I do mention it in a lot of these drafts. The listeners are probably like, it is something you always go on about, Colm. Every single draft you talk about the bye weeks. It's not something though that I use, unless it's a case that through 5 rounds we've picked multiple players that are in week 14, for example. That was one of the reasons I was intrigued by the Smith pick. Is week 9 is a nice bye week where there's not a huge amount of teams. We do draft Jerry Jeudy as well, who's on week 9, but we now have 2 running backs that are on the week 10 with Chase Brown, but you mentioned Scadaboo, Charbonnet, 14 and 8, and we will be adding running backs as we move through. The reason I'm happy to go running back there, as I mentioned, some of the other tight end options potentially as we move through it. We do have a couple of wide receivers as well that we can potentially look at in these upcoming rounds. But yeah, Spears and Tootin are 2 options I like. Spears, just the one that does go RB40 versus RB42 in terms of where you're picking them up. You did mention Colson Loveland, though. It does sound like from recent interviews now it was him talking. And when players talk about their physical health, sometimes it needs to take a little bit of a grain of salt. But again, when we're starting to get into these areas, like him and Tyler Warren post NFL draft were pretty close in terms of ADP, and Loveland, potentially ranked ahead of him at that particular point. Now you're getting into the 11th round, and we've taken Tyler Warren, although ahead of ADP at the 701. Let's say even if he went in the middle of the 8th round, you're getting a multiple round discount on a tight end prospect like that. And I do think that there'll be a lot of drafts where maybe I'm happy to pass there on the running back and take Loveland to add to the roster. When you mentioned the 2 rookie tight ends, I kind of was like, maybe that is a fun way to play it. We have other rookie tight ends, Shawn, that we want later in the draft. I don't know, should we have 4 rookie tight ends at the end of the draft? Loveland, though, who does go at the 11:05, would you prefer Loveland over Tyjae Spears? I love to, make a call on a player and then ask Shawn, would you have done something different?
Yeah, the reason that I went ahead and clicked Spears for us is, again, this look ahead element where we really have been discussing taking Luther Burden and Bryce Young as the 2 guys at the 12, 13
Yep.
for many, many rounds here. If we do that, then we would end up being behind at the running back position, even if we expect to take a lot down the stretch. The problem is that it's also true at tight end. This is going to be one of our weakest tight end teams. As you mentioned in the first show, the real problem that you run into with an early pick is that you either have to make a big reach at the tight end position, or you simply will be disappointing in terms of what the overall firepower for your roster is at tight end. And that's one of the reasons why we made the decision to take Warren there. The issue simply is that this range from Tucker Kraft, who goes early in 8, he's not someone we had an option of taking back at the 8-9 turn. From him all the way through, the rest of these guys, they just don't do a lot for you in anything other than a pretty shocking outcome, right? Tucker Kraft, someone who could be a breakout play. But when you're looking at Dalton Kincaid, Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goedert, Jonnu Smith, Kyle Pitts, I mean, none of those guys are going to do much for you. They're better plays in a tight end format that is touchdown heavy, where you just take their touchdown weeks and say, that's fine, they score there. In a tight end premium format where you actually want these guys to be in the lineup quite a bit, we don't like any of those options at the price when you think about what you're giving up in order to take a very mundane tight end. Now, Isaiah Likely, someone that I did have in the queue for us. I think it's a long shot, but he does have some breakout potential. He's pretty interesting as someone who, even if the overall receptions aren't there, they could be bunched. There are potentially going to be some in-game tactical situations where they come out with a game plan where you think about week 1 last year against the Chiefs. If you have in-game tactics determining either Likely this week or Mark Andrews this week, Likely's production from a best ball perspective could be better than his full season production. again, if we do end up getting the picks that we've kind of foreshadowed or projected here at the 12-13 in Burden and Young, I mean, our tight end plays are going to be weak, but they're also going to be interesting, right? From the perspective of guys like Terrence Ferguson, Harold Fannin, Jatavian Sanders, those plays I don't think are that dissimilar from the guys going in rounds 8 through 11.
I would agree with that. And when I was looking through just the ADP, since we made the pick, it's going to be, I think that's one that we'll come back to at the end, depending on how we hit on our running backs and tight ends the rest of the way. We would have got, it's usually the 9-12, that we're seeing Loveland go off the board, and he does make it back to the 10-12. So you were getting a round of ADP. Maybe that'll be one that we come back to in hindsight, as to we could have went tight end there, pushed the Spears pick, and see how the rest of it goes. Now, if it's a case that we are able to get, some of those tight ends that we talked about, will be set up. Maybe Shawn, maybe it's a Cole Kmet team. Maybe that's what we're waiting for. He is somebody that is boxed off here in round 18, as we look at the potential options that could get back to us. So it is about playing ahead, knowing kind of the options that are available. Sometimes there will be times where maybe you play that a little bit, too cute and get caught out, but hopefully we won't get caught out here today. Shawn, we have seen a big run on QB since that Loveland pick. Geno Smith, Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, likely, who you mentioned, then Jaden Higgins, who we really do like, but goes to the far side of the board in general. Then Justin Herbert, Matthew Stafford, Tua, Trey Harris, CJ Stroud, and then Rashid Shaheed. So we're 7 picks away. Michael Penix gets selected. Most of the teams that are drafting now, until we get back to us, barring the team in the 2 spot, have 2 QBs. So we'll see if the QBs get passed. But the reason I bring up the QBs is we're looking ahead to see if the QB that Shawn mentioned there a few moments ago, and Bryce Young, gets back to us. He is usually, though, somebody who goes in the early 13th. So that would be nice if he gets back. Pair him with McMillan for that particular roster. And then that is where we would potentially be looking at Luther Burden. Other players that I have, marked up here as potential options when it would get back to this area. Garendo usually goes before it would come back to us here at this particular point. I believe Jaden Blue is still available as we work our way through these selections. He usually goes before it would get to our pick here. But yeah, then we're looking at Luther Burden, Ray Davis, Bryce Young as potential options for us. Preferences, Shawn, is it clear for you that it's Bryce Young, Luther Burden, if that works out?
I'm pretty intrigued by some of these running backs.
Yeah,
It's going to be tough to pass on. I mean,
we
Trey
do lose
Benson.
Garendo and Tootin. They were 2 that I was very interested in.
And Garendo's interesting. I think that Trey Benson is a more straightforward pick from a team perspective. He does go there with Kyler Murray. I think that is kind of interesting. Dylan Sampson, frankly, should just be gone, right?
Yeah, that's true too.
So,
Everything that's going on.
I mean, that's one where you don't want to you don't want to constantly be above what the market is, but the market is going to eventually value him in a range where this looks like a huge bargain. So, especially now that Luther Burden actually does go a couple picks ahead of us, I think that one of those 2 players with Bryce Young is super clear option. I'm always tempted to push the QBs. One of the things is that once we have made the Colts picks that we've already made, then, I mean, you've backed yourself into that Daniel Jones corner
It's
to
true.
where, I mean, why do you not just take him at a cheap price? Now, I say that once we have McMillan, and I do think that Bryce Young is this year's Baker Mayfield, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pass on him here if he comes. He doesn't make it, though. He goes
Yep.
2 picks ahead. So that's
Decision made.
decision made. It's sort of a huge bummer. At the same time, it does give us these Benson and Sampson picks that, I mean, they seem pretty clear cut.
Yeah, to fit in with what we're doing. Benson hasn't been somebody that I have been targeting, but he also, after our conversation last week talking through the James Conner part of it, we hope James Conner is another big season, but it is a case of, there with veteran running backs, there's a lot of tricky situations, whether it's performance, whether it's health at that particular juncture of your career as you're getting older. And Benson would slot in there, would also fit in to this particular roster for the link with Kyler Murray, but would also fit in for that Week 17 game against the Bengals, who we've backed up early in the draft. Dylan Sampson, Shawn, I was very surprised in terms of his ADP that he didn't go. Now, ADP wise, and this is where like looking at stuff from the last couple of days will give you some insight. He still by ADP is going at the late 13th. So if we pulled up late 13th, but with what's going on, I would expect like him to continue to kind of cruise up into that probably into the 10th round is where, and especially if there's a longer suspension, I think he pushes probably up into the kind of, I don't know, the Cam Scatterby, Jordan Mason area of the draft. I know that's not that far behind where Judkins was going in the 7th round, but do you think that's ambitious for how high he would go, or do you see him kind of settling on maybe in the 10th round range? But I do think I'm surprised, when there's news like that coming out, that we've seen some people in this draft, take swings on like a JJ McCarthy. There's a couple of other players I've noticed that have gone quite well ahead of ADP. Trey Harris, for example, signed his contract over the last kind of couple of days, and he went a round ahead of ADP in this one. I'm surprised that we've seen Dylan Sampson last true to this particular point. And then the other one that I do want to ask, kind of on the opposite with negative news, Jaden Blue is still available. He has been kind of in the 12th round range. Obviously, kind of some not so positive reports coming out over the last couple of days of how his camp is going. But a little bit, so have you cooled off a little bit on Blue? I know post draft he was somebody that we talked a lot about.
Blue one is tricky. I still have a pro article coming out on him, but I'm gonna have to switch the focus to something to the effect of, is the best pick in the draft already going down the Kendre Miller path? When you look at Blue and you have this situation with Texas where he's the clear-cut guy to lean on, and they basically don't give him the ball at all. It raises some eyebrows, right? There's just no question in this draft that you had two players that were really interesting from a receiving back perspective. And those players were Brashard Smith and Jaden Blue. And Brashard Smith was the better of the two players by a country mile. And I mean, I'm actually a huge Kansas City Chiefs homer. And yet it wasn't just like relief and euphoria when he goes to the Chiefs, but it was still just this question of why. Like, how did the other teams let him get there? And why would a team like the Cowboys have taken the guy who didn't prove himself in college and maybe has these red flags? Now, the funny thing is we're still reading pieces out of, KC like fan sites saying that Brashard Smith isn't even going to make the team because they are ready to win a Super Bowl, and you've got to go with players like Pacheco and Kareem Hunt and Elijah Mitchell. There's a lot of denial in Kansas City about just how bad the running backs that they used last year are. And I think some of that denial does extend to the team. But when you listen to the team, I mean, the idea that Brashard Smith would not make the roster seems more or less impossible. You have to be aware of what the 7th round pick means. And yet, I mean, he's a guy who fills one of the most important niches left in terms of them building a team that doesn't get humiliated by the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl, and that is able to do more than just eke out wins all through the year, right? I mean, the Chiefs were pretty gross last season, right up until they yet again beat the Bills in the playoffs. And so when we're looking at these pieces, the idea that Jaden Blue has some football ethic problems, I mean, that actually fills in the blanks more than comes as a huge surprise.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we'll see if there's any positive stuff, but we're starting to really slide down. Still has not been selected. Maybe Shawn, we get a chance to select him at the the 14-15 turn. But to get back to what we need to do to attack the rest of this draft, we now have 1 quarterback, 6 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 1 tight end. I am kind of looking at being able to get Benson and Sampson there, and looking back at the Spears versus Loveland pick, and maybe thinking that would have been nicer, because there is going to be running backs that we're intrigued by here in the upcoming rounds. But passing there on the quarterback, or not necessarily passing on it, but Bryce Young going before our pick, and you talked about the Daniel Jones potential option. It is interesting. There's Jones. One of the reasons that I kind of look at the Colts QBs and be like, you kind of need them after ADP is you may have a chance to draft like a Jaquez Hunter or a Giddens or a Shipley if they were to slide. But we are now kind of getting into a point where, because we want running back there, we will be able to maybe take some of the tight end targets that we want later in the draft, rather than looking at the running backs that go in that range. You did mention Smith, Rashad Smith. He does go right in the range where Sanders and Ferguson go. So, ideally, if we're coming away with 1 or 2 of those tight ends versus, passing up on Smith or Krosky Merritt, for example, or even a Keaton Mitchell, that's going to open the door. When we look then to the Colts, Jaden Blue does go in the 1404. When we look then at the Colts, Shawn, and the QB situation, are you still quite strong? There's been positive reports over the last couple of days on Anthony Richardson and his health post-injury. You still quite strong on the Daniel Jones leading the way there? And is there any drafts that you would get into a situation where you would be open to drafting Anthony Richardson? Obviously, the athletic profile and the rushing capabilities that he does have. But I guess the other part of that is when he's added in there, kind of is going to sink the passing offense.
Yeah, it just thinks Tyler Warren. And so I wouldn't be looking at him on a Tyler Warren team. I'd be looking at him in this exact scenario where we had a different tight end. Right. And I wouldn't be looking at him here. I'd be looking at him late. And so you may not get him to fall to you in the situations where you need him. And yet, it's just a very tricky circumstance that you run into when you are on the extreme ends and you can't control some of these runs. This has been a little bit of a QB run draft that sets us up, not necessarily poorly, but it just gives us some additional risk. I certainly am glad that we did go ahead and get Kyler Murray where we got him, because I like the other picks that we have made. And so from that perspective, I think we're in pretty good shape. Colm, as we come up on this one, I mentioned that we're kind of higher on Freiermuth than Jonnu. I think you could take him here. He was the top name ADP wise. He does go. Things get a little bit trickier again now. Who do you like right here, where we have a lot of needs, but we're in a little bit of an area where there are no clear cut smash selections?
Yeah, I was looking at Cedric Tillman as a potential option at wide receiver. When I got into the part about the 6 running backs, 5 wide receivers, I do feel like there's going to be limited options as we move through the rest of the draft now to address the wide receiver positions. I don't feel like there's anyone here, unless it was like a Kyle Williams, but not overly pushed there. So I'm kind of wondering if we want to go down to that running back tier, if we want to pull up one of the tight ends. I'd be open into pulling up one of the tight ends if that was the way you wanted to go. I feel like I would push the Jones pick here, unless you want to take him as the player we pull up. But what are you feeling on this one?
Well, let's make sure we don't blow what's an awesome draft. So let's go ahead and reach on both Jatavian Sanders and Daniel Jones. We have that fit perfectly there. Sanders is going at a spot where we would have had a shot to get him at the next turn, but he is the other really big breakout play at tight end. We like him more as a 10th round type of value. Again, not only are we not drafting him in round 10, we're not really drafting him at the 14-15 turn, except in emergency circumstances like this. But when you have this build where your team is fantastic, but you have a big weakness, and that weakness is tight end, I think Jatavian Sanders is the name that you're thinking, okay, well, how do I win? It's not a matter of how to fill names in. How do I win? And the way that you would win with this team that's so loaded is that if Jatavian Sanders hits on the upper end of his outcomes, does take that next step, is part of the Bryce Young development. I kind of like him with a Tech McMillan. We're kind of betting on this offense working in the right direction. It'd be great to have a Bryce Young, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of internal consistency here. But the main thing is just that we got the players we need. We need a Daniel Jones with a Tyler Warren because the other QBs are all gone, and we needed that tight end. And Sanders is really the guy who gives you a chance to be a big winner.
Yeah, so I mentioned, and to be honest, I was going to make the pitch, and I was kind of sussing out, is that the direction that Shawn wants to go on the Sanders pick? The reason I would do that, if we look here by ADP, we were selecting there at the 14-15 turn. So if we're looking ahead to 16-17, that is where we're hoping to get Sanders. He goes at the 17:01. So we do technically take him, 24 picks basically above ADP in this particular situation. But if we kind of, as we talked earlier about the Warren pick that we made, and then what goes after that and what goes in between, Juwan Johnson, Darren Waller, as we look through the names that will go off the board, Dalton Schultz goes off after that. Pat Firemouth went just before it. Kid Otten went just before that. But when we continue to look at the names that will start to fall off the board here, Tyler Higbee will get drafted in between that. But the reason that I felt like pulling him up there is the way to play it is I would like to get him and Terrence Ferguson if Ferguson falls, and this allows us to open up that particular path. I mentioned at the start of the show that somebody like a Marshawn Lloyd would be, an option, but when we have built out the running back room the way we have, it kind of doesn't really fit with what we're looking to do at the moment. So I really like, getting the QB to make sure we don't get caught short. It leaves the door open for a third QB, and maybe we can talk through this. I don't know if Shawn's thinking in the same way as I am, but Jackson Dart or Jalen Milrow, maybe like that 20th round dimension gets quite flat. Maybe that's an area where Milrow could make it all the way back to us, but we don't have a lot of wide receiver options that we're going to be looking at here. So I think that was a really nice way to play it. And if we do end up getting, Harold Fanning or a Terrence Ferguson coming back to us, it'll have worked out really, really well. So Darren Waller, Theo Johnson recently off the board. The wide receivers that have gone since our selection was Betch and Xavier Leggett. Would have been interested though if Tillman did make it that one more pick. Him and Marvin Mims were some of the wide receivers I was kind of intrigued by if they made it to us, but that did not happen. When we look now, Shawn, at what we need to do to finalize out this roster. So we have 2 QBs, 6 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. We have 5 picks left. We could go to 3 quarterbacks if we need. We could get up as high as 4 tight ends potentially based on what we have here at the moment. Are you comfortable enough with this running back room to say that it's complete, or would you like to get up to 7 running backs? And then I have hinted a few times at the wide receivers in this area not being that appealing. Have you any wide receivers going through these later rounds that you would like to get on the roster, or you're kind of targeting late, or is it kind of some of the rookies sprinkled in there and not much else?
I think you can look at Kyle Williams. We're a little bit more skeptical of his profile than some folks, but I do think that there is a path simply because he's got a very wide range of outcomes as a rookie, and they have almost nothing. So you would look at Williams as an interesting flyer pick. Jalen McMillan, someone who was really strong over the last, say, third of last season, he is now basically free because the path doesn't look very clear. But we think about injuries. As soon as that happens, then he's a very viable and interesting, especially touchdown play. Again, you can make that work for you better in best ball than in redraft, where maybe you never feel comfortable starting him. I do think that for the last rounds, the guys that I really like to pick a lot, and you want to be careful about getting these guys on too many rosters because if they end up being zeros, then you're playing just short. But Jalen Royals, Troy Franklin, they should be going earlier because they're not. You always have those outs at the very end of drafts to where you don't have to push it here if you've got better or more compelling options in any way, shape, or form. I mean, those players I think have really interesting outlooks. I mean, Jalen Royals now, if Rashee Rice is suspended, I'm not saying at all that he's going to replace Rashee Rice and win the job, and then Rice comes back, and like, what we use him for? I mean, even if we think Rice was a little bit overvalued before the suspension risk popped up, we think he's very good, right? I mean, that's not going to happen. But the opportunity to play some could make Jalen Royals very interesting. I mean, someone like a Hollywood Brown, compared to other players, very likely to be injured, or at least the injury risk there is a little bit outsized. I think you have to really like him. And then Troy Franklin is just a guy where a second year breakout, it's not necessarily likely, but his profile was fantastic. They've been talking him up a little bit from the offseason workouts because Mims and because Pat Bryant, who is also still available, are so interesting. He tends to be a guy who's forgotten, but it could be him, right? And if he's the best player at the price. So those guys give us this sort of back to front element where if we know we have them in our back pocket, we can do other things at this turn. The mildly frustrating thing was that Terrence Ferguson did go at the 15-16 turn. As we head for the 16-17 turn, Jalen McMillan does get picked right there. But Colm, I mean, this is this is the spot where you could go with that Harold Fannin, Cole Kmet 1-2 punch, and you actually end up with a tight end position. He has a lot of upside despite the travails, the struggles, despite the weird path that we took getting there.
Yeah, so they are the two names here. We have top of the queue. You mentioned some of the wide receivers, and I think we could risk another play you add to the queue for later when I've been talking with the quarterbacks. Dylan Gabriel is in there for the way we set up this team with some Cleveland Browns on it. I'm very much on board. I think this team needs the 4 tight ends, and it also gives you the upside where if it's Sanders, if Warren, if the players are coming through, it's giving you that firepower to put into the flex with the tight end premium. So I do like going that particular direction and then seeing what falls to us in those last couple of rounds, potentially at the wide receiver position. That would get us to 2, 6, 5, and 4 at tight end. So it's basically Kmet or one of those receivers, and I think we'll risk seeing that some of the receivers make it back to us potentially.
So, Colm, the only other name I would mention here would probably be Brashard Smith if we wanted to make that as the final pick of the running back group. But I like going with Cole Kmet here. If you don't take the Colston Loveland value or that path, we do want to have at least a few teams that are Cole Kmet based. You could have some injuries or some issues with Loveland. You could have them actually break out into a Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez type of situation this season. Ben Johnson doesn't really have the running backs that he had to work with in Detroit. We do, even though you got that wide receiver depth where DJ Moore could be a star, Rome Odunze could be a breakout, Luther Burden is a huge wild card, but someone with a ton of upside. Those 3 guys all have some red flags attached to their names currently. I mean, maybe this team uses them, certainly not purely as clear out types of players, but forces the defense to account for them and then really peppers these tight ends with targets. A couple of years ago, Cole Kmet was breaking out to borderline star status. Competent and creative offensive coordinators have been able to make multiple tight ends fantasy relevant. And if there ever is a team that would do that, in 2025, it certainly looks like it would be the Chicago Bears. I'd have more optimism about them accomplishing it, certainly, than the Pittsburgh Steelers, where you look at the Steelers and you're like, those tight ends probably have better floors. We look at them as a unit than, say, Loveland and Kmet, but the Loveland-Kmet duo has a much, 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 much higher ceiling.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I do agree as well on like there will be drafts where Loveland would, and Loveland probably would have fitted in this roster. Like question now when we have those picks made is do we want a Tajay Spears, Cole Kmet team, or do we want a Colston Loveland, Brashard Smith team? It's I depending on which way the wind's blowing, I could see a lot of upside for either side, but I might lean towards that Loveland Smith side for the upside. Which side would you rather?
Well, I think that the side that we took is pretty compelling from a balance of veterans and rookies. We took Tet McMillan. We have that Tyler Warren pick already in the bag when we're trying to make that decision. Take Scadaboo. We really like him. We take what we think is going to end up being a big value on Dylan Sampson. We know that we're going to take Harold Fannin later. I think
Yeah.
that the path that we went down gives us nice balance and keeps us from being too rookie heavy.
Yeah, I think the ones that we've taken gives you kind of a little bit more of that floor element. I think the other picks could potentially have more ceiling, but they also could lead to not a huge amount in 2025. So, fun little part of the draft to look at. The reason I was okay passing on Smith is based on us having the six RBs so far, and there will be a couple of running back options here as we get through these later rounds that we could go for. Really like trying to add Smith to as many teams as we can, but we had a nice stretch there from 9 through 13 where we picked up the 5 running backs, which kind of changed the trajectory of the need for some of those picks. Jerome Ford went at the 17:08. Anthony Richardson still on the board in terms of QBs. Russell Wilson, Tyler Shaw. There's quite a few QBs still languishing out there. I mentioned earlier that Dylan Gabriel now sliding into the queue. Maybe he comes into that conversation at the end of the draft as a kind of a potential Mr. Irrelevant pick. In this format, Joe Flacco going in the 19th round by ADP. Shadur Sanders actually going at the moment 2012 by ADP, ahead of Dylan Gabriel, who I would much rather be drafting from that duo of rookies. So, Shawn, we are going to be waiting a little bit of time for this next pick, but something at this point, again, when you're looking at how to finish it out, 3 picks left. We're done at tight end. Could add a QB to give you just some of that kind of playoff and throughout the season upside in case there's an injury, for example. But I do feel like at least one wide receiver is probably needed in these final 2 picks. I would probably think that all playing out accordingly, it might be one across QB, running back, and wide receiver. What are you kind of thinking? I would also potentially be open to, if it works out with the wide receivers, 2 wide receivers out of the final 3 picks. What would you like to do here as we get ready to cross the line and get ready to cash our check for 300K?
You have Michael Wilson up there at the top of the ADP list at the receiver position. The talent there is just a big enough problem, and you don't want to limit the pathways that you're going down, but frankly, for us to win the tournament, Kyler Murray needs to rush for touchdowns
Yeah,
in that week 17 game. Also, for him to do enough during the course of the season, Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride really need to be the guys. It's almost a little bit of a problem if Michael Wilson gives you quite a few points sort of on the path there. I think Keenan Allen is an interesting name as someone who would shoot up once he is signed. If in fact that ever happens, we thought Will Fuller was going to be signed back in the day, even though there were whispers that maybe he just was done, and that turned out to be the case. Colm, I don't know if you've heard anything there. He's also a name where he's probably, I mean, we say shoot up, but at this point, he's so cheap that even once he shoots up, he will also be cheap. You can just go ahead and take him once that risk is removed. So you're dealing with some of those questions. The 3 guys that I like the most all sort of project to go undrafted. And so this 18-19 turn,
yeah.
where my favorite 3 players are ETN, Royals, and Franklin, I don't know which player we think is the most important, or which 2 are the most important to protect, or if there is someone else, given that these guys project to go undrafted, that we're still overlooking.
No, I think the names we have in the queue, just let the listeners know the full queue. And no, I did mention Jackson Dart a couple of times as well. He's not in the queue, but it could be added in, but it's not essential. I talked about Gabriel fits more with the lineup. Flacco obviously would fit in if you're picking that side of the bet. I think that like Coker's interesting, Royals you mentioned, especially now when you add in the Rice potential upcoming suspension as well. Franklin, there's just a lot of pieces there when we look at Franklin as to what is in front, or the combination of pieces that are alongside him with Denver. But I do agree with you what you said earlier. The Trevor Etienne pick, Shawn, I continue to be astounded that he's going undrafted. I probably would try and risk him to that last pick. But if we want a running back, he is the running back here. He's the only running back we have in the queue. And if like he's the he's the running back I would like to draft. If it's a case that like Coke where Royals, Franklin all go. Like even a Jalen Noel would be a fallback at wide receiver if we have to do that. So if you want to add a running back to this roster, the first pick I would probably do would be the ETN one, unless you are happy to miss out. That's kind of my balance there in him. Are you happy to miss out if we miss out on him? Are you happy to finish here with the 6 RBs?
I think he's too fun. So Zach and I tried to pass him to the 26 a couple of days ago, and he didn't make it to us by like 2 picks, and it did disrupt. I mean, it disrupted only from the perspective of, I mean, he's dramatically undervalued, and we wanted a running back in that last round, and then you shift really what you're looking at for that pick if it has to be someone else. Now there are other names. There's Sean Tucker, there's Isaiah Davis, there's Ollie Gordon. I think those 3 guys are pretty interesting, but especially in this bet where we're saying the Panthers are going to make a move, I
And
like
they're going to be
him on
good.
this team, and they're going to be good, right? We're saying they're going to be good. The other thing here, Franklin just is not being drafted. He's going to be there at the 2012. I think that we can take Royals in this other pick and
Yep.
feel it's not, it was never 100%. And we talk about Franklin enough that, if there are other folks who share that and they're also saying, I mean, Franklin's going to be there for our 20th round pick, you could possibly lose it, but there are pivots from him that will work as you explained. And so I think the ETN Royals turn there is a lot of fun.
Shawn, during this draft and the FFPC, one of the things there is the chat box as it works its way through the draft. We did get picked out. We don't have like RotoViz as our team name or anything in this one. We were sussed out in the chat that it was us, which is interesting when when you're doing the team. But when people are listening in, they obviously know the players that we like. Yeah, so I think we'd be finishing up here probably with the wide receiver or the quarterback. So we have quite a few options that are potentially available. You mentioned Franklin multiple times. Coker could fit in, probably getting a little bit over leveraged on the Panthers without having Bryce Young, with the way we've played it out so far with the tight end, wide receiver, and running back now combination. Dylan Gabriel, Joe Flacco, we've talked about them a couple of times here, and we haven't really fully got into it. And I do love that you've added Diami Brown to the queue. He was a player that we were really waiting on a couple of years ago in this competition, Shawn, to try and win it all in week 17, and we didn't get anything from him as a Washington Commander. Had a strong finish to the season last year now with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they are talking him up a little bit. So maybe he continues to ascend. I believe he was the 20th round pick on that particular roster too. But the Browns QB situation, I mentioned Sanders is getting drafted at the end of these ahead of Gabriel. Then you have Joe Flacco. Then you have Kenny Pickett. Any way that it's not kind of Gabriel and Flacco, I see a lot of conversation online that is very certain that it's going to be Kenny Pickett that starts the season. How do you see this playing out? And I guess with the way we've drafted this team, we're going to need Kyler Murray to put up the points as the season progresses early. We need Daniel Jones to stay healthy and play well, obviously, to give us a secondary option. But really, this team, you're kind of thinking later in the season, the playoffs, you're in the 20th round, you're looking for that upside that's going to take you over the line at the end of it. At that point, I think the Browns are going to be turning it over to see what they have in their rookie rather than thinking, what can, like, I don't know what age Joe Flacco is now. Is he like 47? What's he going to give us in 2026?
He might be something like 63. I think he's going to be pretty good, right? And the things you tend to read about the Browns QB situation is that they're really looking to see what they have in Kenny Pickett because they think that they know what they have in Joe Flacco, which is someone who can do sort of what he did a couple years ago. That doesn't really get you anywhere from the long term. One of the things that they've done is that they have created an interesting 2025 roster from the perspective of they've got a guy who can do that sort of Ryan Fitzpatrick, move the ball down the field, make us competitive, make us interesting. And then they have 3 sort of optionality types of plays where we tend to think of it as only the rookies, but they also have Kenny Pickett there as someone who is a recent former first round pick that they're very serious about taking a look at. And if he does flash, if he does impress, if he starts to materialize that first round profile, he will be the guy, right? They're looking at those other 3 players as we've got to vet them. They give us chances at it. You don't know where Tom Brady's going to come from. You don't know where Tony Romo is going to come from. We want to make sure we're looking at as many players as possible and as inexpensively as possible. But the other thing you do continue to hear is that, I mean, they like what they're getting from Dylan Gabriel, right? You're talking about someone with accuracy and processing. That's why they drafted him ahead of Shedeur Sanders. It's why he's been ahead during this offseason. It's why, I mean, he's probably going to be the starter for the Browns over the second half of the season. He's a much, much better pick in Superflex. I don't think you can really burn a pick on him in normal best ball, even though I have put him in the queue for us. But if
Shawn, do
he's
you
going to
want
be
to
the
win it
quarterback over
all?
the second half, I mean, yeah, right.
Do you
I
want
mean,
to like? We only need him to play 3 weeks at the end of the season to set himself up as the starter in 2026. That's all we need. He'll imagine all the the mental process he'll have added to what he already knows when his 16 weeks on the bench to step in week 17 to just get us over the line for 300k. Again, I think like he would fit in. The Browns QBs would fit in when we're looking at the players we've taken already. Both in Dylan Sampson and Jerry Jeudy. I'm looking here at what is the pick that completely adds upside to the roster, and I like the running back options and Davis and Garden. I like the option of potentially adding Franklin, but like if Franklin is on the roster, the one area that I'd be looking to add another wide receiver is based on the number of wide receivers we have. We obviously took 5 wide receivers through the opening 6 rounds, so we are very top heavy, but then we only took the 1 wide receiver beyond that in Jalen Royals. But I'm kind of looking at which pick transcends this team if it hits. Like who could be an 8-9 pick value versus where they're going now. And probably Gabriel, if he's the starter, is the one that I would say. I'm going to let you have the rest of it now. Troy Franklin, can he get you the 300k? What if Daniel Jones isn't the starter, Shawn?
I think so.
Go on, make the decision.
If Daniel Jones isn't the starter, we're not going to win with this team.
Yeah.
Colm, Troy Franklin was one of the best prospects last year, got open for that long touchdown in the wild card game, has flashed in the offseason. Courtland Sutton is going to be traded before the trade deadline this year. Those other guys are going to score a lot of fantasy points. Franklin is going to be the third guy in that Rashid Shaheed, Rashad Bateman category where you don't have enough overall target volume to be a redraft starting option, but you're very interesting in best ball. Shaheed, Bateman go in the 12th and 13 rounds. Troy Franklin goes at 2012. To answer your question, yes, he can be the tournament winner.
I hope you're right, Shawn. We can all, have a nice chuckle at the end of the season when we're collecting the check here. But man, imagine how are you going to feel in week 17 when Dylan Gabriel's slinging touchdowns to Jerry Jeudy? Maybe that's all we need because we still would get those Jerry Jeudy points and we'd be happy. But it's fun to kind of.
Well, I'm going to feel pretty good because I'm going to be winning $100,000 because all of my FFPC Superflex teams have Dylan Gabriel.
Okay, and they probably all have Jerry Jeudy as well. I know we've been drafting quite a bit of Jerry Jeudy. But to finish up, we finish up with a 2-7-7-4 build. Looking through the entire draft, there is a couple of other 4 tight end teams. Everyone has got to at least 3, which I think is essential when you're building this out. I really like how this roster has come out. We did push tight end until we got that Warren pick. But I really like having the options that we've kind of built out that room with Sanders, Fanning, and Cole Kmet. And then we've kind of the QBs. It's kind of like when you're building out these teams, you're going to tell yourself basically a story in each draft as to how the season plays out for this to work out. And if it's a case that Anthony Richardson's the starter, this team's going to be in trouble. If it's a case that Kyler Murray can't see over the offensive line again, the team may be in trouble.
No way. He's going to run more this season.
I think he's actually got like
if he can't see 1,000-yard rushing season from Kyler Murray.
He's got special cleats, Shawn, that they actually, he's I don't know 3 inches taller.
I have been actually having people seriously ask me about that. Whereas, their question is, couldn't he do that? Couldn't Dylan Gabriel do that? But Colin, this is the part to clip, well down the line, 1,000-yard rush season.
Yeah, I see sometimes, like I've seen Derrick Henry do it. I've seen a lot of running backs do the kind of, they kind of jump and then throw the ball for those kind of sneak touchdown plays where they pretend they're going to run through the line. They stop, they hop up, they toss the ball over. Maybe Kyler has been working on that all offseason. Maybe that's the way we go here. That's how he gets those easy completions to Trey McBride in the end zone for some touchdowns. But all joking aside, we have Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Ted McMillan, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy up top. And then we've added Royals and Franklin at the end. If we get anything from those last two guys, we obviously have a lot of firepower at the top of the board. So wide receiver, although we had to backfill in those last two rounds, is pretty loaded. At the top end, we've Chase Brown, Cam Scatterby, Zach Charbonnet, Tyjae Spears, Trey Benson, Dylan Sampson, Shawn. We also added Trevor Etienne, who I don't know if people are sure that he exists, but he does, and he plays for the Carolina Panthers. So we take him, and I'm pretty excited. I think there's going to be quite a bit of that running back room who will end up on that zero RB teaser piece that Shawn mentioned. So drafting out of the 101, Shawn, we talk about this, drafting at the turns have its challenges. I think we drafted out of the 112 maybe in our last draft, and after that I wasn't feeling as enthused or optimistic as I am after this. I'm pretty happy with how this team turned out. How are you feeling about it?
I think that when you look at the individual plays, there is a lot of contingent upside with this roster. You could make the argument that you could balance it out better so that you weren't in a situation where something like Cam Scatterby hits, Kenneth Walker gets injured, and Zach Charbonnet hits, but Benson and Sampson and ETN are zeros. So maybe your running backs are still a little bit tricky, especially if you have, anything happen to a Chase Brown or just he doesn't score at the level we're looking for. You're thinking, okay, in most rosters, if Jatavian Sanders breaks out or Harold Van breaks out, then you're off to the races. But in this one, you have a rookie tight end up early to where he could underperform. And if those guys break out, then you're almost just treading water. You've got a little bit of that element for this draft, but I would also say that I do think that these individual pieces are undervalued. Now, that's always going to be the case when you draft off of your own board. When you draft off of your board, you should like your team and you should feel like the guys are undervalued. But this is a team right here that gives us a lot of rankings value. And so if you're pushed into a situation at the edges where maybe you're not going to be able to get ADP value in the same way, or you're going to have to occasionally reach because of the positional runs, that's where you can default to getting rankings value and draft the guys that you like, as opposed to panicking and saying, okay, well, I feel out of position. Take players with a lot of upside, players that you have identified as being key pieces of your best ball strategy for the season. Meld them together in a way that makes sense here. And I think that in many ways, this is an exciting team for me because all four positional groups have a lot of upside. And
Yeah.
that's the type of team that when you're looking down the stretch, I mean, I could see this team being middle of the pack, say week 6, and you're not really paying that close of attention to it because it's got a lot of points to make back in order to catch that sort of stagger at the week 14 point to be able to advance to the postseason. But then over the last half or 2/3, you're really roaring, you're pulling points back in bunches. I don't think you're even, down to the last couple of weeks necessarily where you get over the line if the players hit. And then once you're looking at weeks 15, 16, 17, this team is very, very strong, right? It is going to be a little bit reliant on Kyler Murray, but the fact of the matter simply is in best ball that if you're drafting the right type of team to where you're not overly invested at the QB position to where it's hurting you everywhere else, all of those types of teams are going to be pretty reliant on the QB hitting anyway. We're not going to be overly leveraged on Kyler Murray through our overall FFPC portfolio. So to have a team here where we're making the bet on him, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned upside. That's the one thing that I feel again when I'm saying that optimism or the enthusiasm is the upside of the team. You can all talk about the downside. If Kyler Murray goes down in week 2, or if he plays really bad, the team is in trouble. The realistic part of this is like you're playing to win the contest. It's not a case, and you want to get as many teams through, but you also are looking at like there's no good in coming like fourth with this team. Like it's going to win it all or not do anything. The other thing, like
Oh,
with
and
the
we've
Kyler
had a
Murray
couple
pick,
teams that finished like 17th and 20th, and there's no
yeah,
real good in that.
yeah.
So, I mean, you're shooting for the very top.
And you know, after him, I mentioned the run of QBs was Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy. You know, they're all in a very similar boat to Kyler Murray, in terms of like, and Baker Mayfield goes around above. Like, there's if he regresses, are those teams in trouble? But I really like the upside that is built in. And the other thing, like we talked about the Warren pick and you know then passing on Loveland, but the player I would love to get at the back end of the second round would have been George Kittle. But then like you're potentially missing out on a Tyreek Hill. Like there's a lot of ways that sometimes when you finish the draft, you're like, I wish this had gone slightly different. But when I look at these picks, I think there's a real combination of exciting upside. So we'll see how it plays out over the course of the season. We'll see how it does in this 12-team field. And then obviously, as I mentioned, advancing through hopefully in the top two and working its way through the playoffs and those 12-team pods to get to that 80-plus person final. I believe 87 was the number. I don't have it up in front of me now at the moment, but for a shot at that 300K. So that is over at the FFPC. Really enjoyed doing this draft. Hopefully people have enjoyed listening in. Part 1 and part 2 now available. Check them both out as we work our way through those early wide receivers and then kind of work through the running back rounds then as we come forward with the tight ends. But good stuff. Really enjoyed it. If you are signing up over at RotoViz, you can use the code RBRadio2025 at checkout to get yourself a 10% discount off a RotoViz NFL Pass. I am recording some shows this week with Matt Harmon that'll be up on the RotoViz Fantasy Football podcast feed. So make sure you check those out as well. And until we are back, have a good one.